The night was biting cold, the kind that felt like needles against bare skin. The city streets of Chicago were mostly quiet, except for the distant hum of passing cars and the faint hiss of falling sleet. Mark Turner, a 32-year-old construction foreman, was walking home after a long shift, his boots heavy with exhaustion and mind clouded with worries about overdue bills and a rent payment that loomed over him like a shadow. He wasn't expecting to find anything unusual that night, just another weary walk through the dark streets he'd grown too used to. But fate had other plans. As he turned a corner near an underpass, he saw something that made his steps halt mid-air. There, under the dim orange glow of a flickering streetlight, sat a young woman on the wet pavement, her knees pulled to her chest, her arms trembling from the cold. Her face was hidden behind a curtain of tangled, rain-soaked hair. She looked too broken to speak. If you believe that kindness and second chances can still change the world, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel. Every story we tell is a reminder that compassion can heal even the deepest wounds. Mark stood there for a moment, unsure if he should approach. She looked fragile, like a piece of porcelain that could shatter at the slightest touch. Her clothes were thin, torn at the sleeves, and soaked through completely. It was clear she had been sitting there for a while, too long. When she finally lifted her head, Mark saw eyes that didn't just carry pain, they carried silence, the kind of silence that comes from being unheard for far too long. Without saying a word, he took off his thick work jacket and gently draped it around her shoulders. She flinched at first, startled, but then froze, almost in disbelief. It was as if she couldn't remember the last time someone had shown her kindness. He didn't ask her name. He didn't demand to know her story. He just stood there beside her, letting her know, in the simplest way possible, that she wasn't invisible. For the next few minutes, they didn't speak. The only sound was the wind rushing through the underpass and the distant clatter of a train. Then, quietly, she whispered, "Thank you." Her voice cracked on the second word, like a brittle branch underfoot. Mark nodded, trying not to make her feel pressured, and offered his hand to help her up. She hesitated, her eyes darting between him and the dark street beyond before finally taking it. They walked together in silence until they reached a small 24-hour diner. Mark pushed the door open, and the warmth of the place enveloped them instantly. The waitress gave him a curious look as they entered. A big man in a hard hat and muddy boots, and a soaked, fragile woman in his oversized jacket. He guided her to a booth, ordered her a hot chocolate, and sat across from her. Steam rose from the mug as she wrapped her trembling hands around it. For a long time, she didn't speak, just stared at the cup as if the warmth itself was something unfamiliar, almost foreign. After a few quiet moments, Mark said softly, "You don't have to talk, just sit here and get warm." She nodded, eyes brimming but refusing to let the tears fall. Eventually she whispered her name, Lena. That was all. No last name, no details, just Lena. The way she said it, Mark could tell it was probably the only piece of herself she still felt belonged to her as the hours passed. Bits of her story came out in fragments. She had come to Chicago 2 years ago with dreams of becoming a nurse, but things went wrong, very wrong. Her mother had passed away, her boyfriend had grown abusive, and soon she found herself alone, jobless, and ashamed to ask for help. She'd spent weeks sleeping wherever she could, bus stations, parks, abandoned buildings, pretending every morning that she was just between places. But as winter crept in, hope started slipping away faster than warmth. Mark listened without interrupting. He'd known struggle too, though in a different way. After his wife's death 3 years earlier, he'd spent months drowning in grief and whiskey, barely holding on to his job. He knew what it was like to lose everything that made life feel worth living. When Lena spoke, he saw pieces of his own past in her words, the same emptiness, the same flicker of pain that comes from being forgotten by the world. When morning light started breaking through the blinds, Mark offered her a deal. He didn't have much, but he had a spare room in his small apartment. "Just until you find your footing," he said, "no strings attached." She hesitated, skeptical, but something in his tone, calm, steady, kind, made her believe him. So she agreed. Over the next few weeks, Lena slowly began to rebuild pieces of herself. At first, she barely spoke. She'd sit by the window, wrapped in Mark's old flannel blanket, staring at the world outside. Some nights, Mark would hear her cry quietly, thinking he couldn't hear. But he never intruded. He just left a cup of tea on the table every morning and a note that said, "You matter." Little by little, she began to smile again. It was faint at first, like the sun peeking through after a long storm, but it was there. She found part-time work at a nearby diner, and soon she was saving money for her own place. She laughed for the first time in months one evening when Mark accidentally burnt dinner and tried to convince her that extra crispy was just his cooking style. For a moment, she forgot the weight of her past. For a moment, she was just Lena again. Mark, on the other hand, realized something profound. Helping her was helping him heal too. Her quiet resilience reminded him that even broken things could be beautiful again. They became a strange kind of family, two lost souls finding warmth in each other's presence. No romance, no grand promises, just understanding, just kindness. But healing is never a straight road. One night, after a particularly long shift at the diner, Lena came home looking distant again. When Mark asked if she was okay, she said her ex had shown up at her work, yelling, demanding money, threatening to drag her back. Panic had set in again, old fears resurfacing like ghosts refusing to rest. That night, she packed her bag. She didn't want to bring trouble into Mark's life. She left a note on the kitchen counter that read, "Thank you for everything. You gave me back my strength, but I need to face the world on my own now." When Mark found the note the next morning, his chest tightened. He drove to the diner, then to the police, then to every shelter in the area, searching for her. For days, there was no sign of Lena. The city felt colder than ever. But just as he was starting to lose hope, one Sunday afternoon, he heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, there she was, standing in the sunlight, tears in her eyes but a genuine smile on her face. She was holding a nurse's uniform in her hands. "I got the job," she said softly. "I start Monday." Mark couldn't find words. He just nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. She stepped forward and hugged him tightly. "You saved me," she whispered. "But more than that, you believed in me when no one else did." That day, Mark realized that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply showing up for someone, not fixing them, not judging them, just standing beside them until they remember how to stand on their own. Lena went on to become a full-time nurse, often volunteering her off hours to help homeless shelters. Every winter, she'd carry spare jackets in her car, just in case she found someone sitting alone in the cold, because she knew exactly what it felt like to be that person. Years later, at a hospital charity event, Lena shared her story publicly for the first time. When the audience asked her what changed her life, she smiled and said, "One man took off his jacket and covered me when I was too broken to speak. That's when I realized kindness isn't small, it's everything." If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today,